Some private donors have struck a deal with the Pentagon to pay death benefits for troops who have been killed since the shutdown began. But Veterans Affairs Secretary Eric Shinseki warned Congress that if the shutdown does continue, hundreds of thousands of vets will lose $6 billion in benefits by November 1st. I'm joined now by a Democratic senator who served in the Marine Corps Reserves and has become focused on the impact of the shutdown on veterans benefits, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal. Senator, thank you for your time. I want to start on the shutdown and veterans, which is there does not appear to be an end in sight, unless I'm missing something. Can Congress find a way to a deal before we reach this November 1st $6 billion veterans Armageddon, I think is the right word in terms of the financing? Is that deal possible?
I think it is, Chris, and the reason I think it's possible is that my colleagues are hearing these real-life stories from veterans, from cancer victims, from all kinds of real people who can tell the story about how their lives are impacted. And one, for example, Jordan Massa, an Iraq veteran, wounded seriously, applied for disability benefits, was awarded them on October 1 after waiting for 2 years for his claim to be processed. And now on October 1, his claim was granted, but he has learned that as of November 1, the Armageddon, as you called it, he may not be receiving those benefits. These kinds of real-life stories for a Purple Heart recipient as he was, and now being denied again the benefits that he really needs and deserves, I think are very compelling. And I think that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle are hearing from Main Street, not just Wall Street. The Treasury bonds are certainly a compelling story, but the Main Street stories about the effect on the economy, small businesses, community banks. I'm hearing from the business community that this kind of brinksmanship has to end. And the 14th Amendment was supposed to prevent this kind of gamesmanship with the national debt.
And, Senator, you're headed up to the White House later today. The president has said publicly, and he said this in 2011, he does not think the 14th Amendment is an appropriate, a reading of the 14th Amendment allows him to raise the debt ceiling without Congress. It sounds like you disagree. Are you going to voice that opinion today?
I have voiced the opinion that the 14th Amendment is a binding obligation on both branches of government. In fact, all three branches. Congress ought to be fulfilling its duty to make sure that the greatest nation in the history of the world pays its debts on time, not with a short-term deal. I respect that we may need some kind of short-term deal, but the majority leader has proposed, and I strongly support, a longer-term extension of the debt ceiling to the end of 2014. And the president has an obligation also under the 14th Amendment, but I respect his view that the litigation, the turmoil, and the turbulence that would result from his unilaterally using it would be a result that we ought to avoid. Both branches of government ought to come together.
Senator, given that, and given the stakes, as you've outlined, both Wall Street and Main Street, what do you believe? Do you believe at some point the president will need to move off of his "we are not negotiating" on the government shutdown, we are not negotiating on the debt ceiling? Do you believe that given all that we have now seen as a result of the shutdown and the potential of a debt ceiling, that he has to move off of that position, and will he?
I think the president is absolutely right in this position. And, you know, one of the most impressive aspects is how strongly united both the Senate Democrats and the House Democrats are behind the president in this position, because this kind of government by short-term crisis, moving from one self-inflicted wound to another when the kinds of hostage-taking demands are yielded to, simply has to stop. And the president's position is obviously not that he won't negotiate or talk or engage in conversation. That seems to be the word du jour. But that he'll do it after we reopen the government and assure that the nation pays its debts. Those kinds of fundamental obligations ought not to be negotiable. We ought to come to work and do our job and get it done for the American people.
Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal, thank you for your time.